The call came at 7:43 in the morning, while Amara Bennett was still standing in her bathroom, holding a pregnancy test that had just changed everything she thought she knew about her life. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Mr. Kang's office now. She looked at the test again. 2 lines, clear as daylight, clear as the sound of her pulse hammering in her ears. She had worked for Kang Tae-Hyun for 3 years, and in 3 years she had learned to read the temperature of his moods before she even stepped through his door. But nothing. Not one single thing in her professional training, not 1 year of managing schedules for one of the most feared men in Los Angeles had prepared her for this moment. She pressed her palm flat against the sink and breathed. She was 2 months pregnant with her employer's child, and he had just summoned her to his office. Before we go any further, if this kind of story grips you right from the very first breath, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment below telling me which city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Drop a like if you're already invested in where this is going. I post new stories every week, and I promise you do not want to miss what comes next. Now, let's get back to Amara. 3 years earlier, Amara Bennett had walked into the Kang Group headquarters carrying a leather portfolio, a pressed blazer she'd bought specifically for the interview, and the kind of composure that took most people a decade to build. She was 28. She had a master's degree in business administration from Georgia State, 4 years of experience as a senior administrative coordinator at a financial consulting firm in Atlanta, and a very clear understanding of what she was walking into. Kang Tae-Hyun was not a secret in the right circles of Los Angeles. His legitimate business operations, real estate development, private equity, a string of upscale restaurants, and entertainment venues across the city were well documented and well respected. The other part of what he ran, the part that existed underneath the polished surface of Kang Group holdings, was something people discussed only in careful language and never in writing. Amara had done her research. She knew who he was. She applied anyway. Not because she was reckless. Not because she was naive. She applied because the position paid nearly 3 times what she was making in Atlanta. Because Los Angeles represented the kind of professional leap she had been working toward for years. And because Amara Bennett had never in her adult life made a decision based on fear. The interview lasted 93 minutes. She knew because she counted. Tae-Hyun sat across from her in a chair that cost more than her first car and asked her questions that had nothing to do with scheduling or correspondence management. He asked her how she handled situations where the right decision and the legal decision were not the same thing. He asked her what she would do if someone she worked with asked her to pretend she hadn't seen something she'd clearly seen. He asked her whether she believed loyalty was a virtue or a liability. Amara answered every question without blinking, without softening her responses to make herself seem more palatable, and without the nervous habit of filling silence with unnecessary words. When the interview ended, Tae-Hyun looked at her for a long moment before saying, "You'll receive an offer by Thursday." She received it Wednesday morning. She accepted it Wednesday afternoon. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of managing the most complicated professional landscape she had ever navigated. 3 years of keeping schedules, managing confidential communications, coordinating between Tae-Hyun's legal business operations and the people who existed in the gray space between legitimate and otherwise. 3 years of learning how to be invisible enough to do her job, and visible enough that no one, not Tae-Hyun's lieutenants, not his business partners, not the various unsavory figures who occasionally moved through those offices, could mistake her for someone who could be pushed around. She had been good at it, better than good, and she had been careful. Careful about her professional distance. Careful about the line between the man who signed her paychecks and the man who occasionally looked at her across a conference table in a way that she told herself meant nothing. Then came the night 4 months ago that she was still trying to figure out how to live with. A quarterly strategy meeting that had run 7 hours past its scheduled end. A bottle of whiskey that someone had opened in the conference room while they waited for a call that kept getting delayed. A conversation that started professionally and shifted somewhere around midnight into something neither of them had planned. The way Tae-Hyun had looked at her when the last of his associates finally cleared the room. The way she had looked back. She wasn't drunk. That was the part she couldn't excuse away. She was tired and she was off balance, and she had spent 3 years being very careful, and that night she was simply not careful enough. She didn't regret it. That was the part she couldn't quite reconcile with the rest of herself, the part that was standing in her bathroom at 7 in the morning, looking at 2 lines on a test that had just detonated her entire carefully constructed life. She didn't regret it, but she also couldn't stay. The elevator ride up to Tae-Hyun's private floor took 45 seconds. Amara had timed it enough times over 3 years that she could have counted it with her eyes closed. She used those 45 seconds to put herself back together. She was good at that. She had learned early in her career that emotions were tools, not enemies, that the key was knowing which one to use and knowing when to lock the rest of them in a room where they couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. She stepped off the elevator with a calm face and a tablet in her hand that she didn't actually need. Tae-Hyun's outer office was empty. His executive assistant, technically Amara's subordinate, practically the gatekeeper between the rest of the world, and the man who ran it was not at her desk. That was unusual. The door to Tae-Hyun's private office was ajar. Amara pushed it open. He was standing at the window. He did that when he was thinking, stood with his back to the room, hands loose at his sides, watching the city below him as though it owed him something. Los Angeles spread out 30 floors below, and in the early morning light it looked almost harmless. He didn't turn around when she walked in. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit down, I'll stand," she said. Because Amara Bennett had never in her professional life sat down simply because she was told to, and she wasn't about to start now. He turned then, and she saw immediately that something had shifted. Tae-Hyun was not a man whose expressions gave much away. She had spent 3 years studying the small calibrations of his face that indicated mood, and even she often couldn't read him past a certain depth. But right now there was something in his eyes that she recognized, even if she couldn't immediately name it. He was holding something. He set it on the desk between them. It was a printed photograph, a parking garage, a woman walking to her car. The timestamp in the corner read 2 days ago. The woman was Amara. She stared at it. Her face didn't move. "I had you followed?" he said. "No, Park Do-jin did. Those are his people. They've been watching you for 10 days. She looked up from the photograph. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need to know what they might find." He paused. "And because I already know part of it." The room got very quiet. Amara set her tablet down on the edge of his desk. Her hands were steady. She had decided on the elevator that her hands were going to stay steady, and she was holding to that decision. "What do you think you know?" she asked. Tae-Hyun looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Were you going to tell me about my child, or were you planning to disappear?" The silence between those words and her next breath lasted about 4 seconds. She knew because she counted those, too. She had prepared for a version of this conversation. She had been preparing for 2 weeks, ever since the morning she sat on the floor of her apartment bathroom and let herself feel the full weight of what the test meant, then stood up, cleaned herself off, and started making a plan. That was what Amara did. She made plans. Plans kept her moving forward when the ground dropped out from underneath her. The plan had been simple. Finish the month. Transfer her key projects to a colleague who could handle them. Resign. Relocate to her sister's place in Houston while she figured out the next step. Have the baby somewhere that was not the gravitational field of a man who ran a criminal empire and who already had more control over the landscape of her daily life than she was comfortable with. The plan had not included him already knowing. "How?" she asked. "Your prescription," he said. "Prenatal vitamins, doctor." Yoon's office. "His clinic handles my organization's medical arrangements." He flagged it to my head of security as a standard protocol matter. He paused. "I was told yesterday, of course." Of course he had a physician who reported to his security team. Of course a man who managed every detail of a criminal empire would have medical intelligence flowing back to him as a matter of routine. She had known that. And she had still used the clinic because it was covered, because she hadn't wanted to spend the money out of pocket when she was already mentally calculating relocation costs. She closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them. "It's not something that needs to concern you," she said. "I have it handled. You have it handled. I'm resigning at the end of the month. I'll be out of the city within 2 weeks of that. You won't have any responsibility or involvement." "Stop talking." His voice was flat, not loud, flat. The kind of flat that meant something cold underneath. Stand there and listen to me for 30 seconds without interrupting. And then you can say whatever you want. Amara pressed her lips together. I am not going to pretend I don't know, he said. I am not going to let you leave Los Angeles with my child. And I am not going to negotiate whether or not I have any involvement in that child's life, because that is not a negotiation I'm willing to have. He let that sit for exactly the 30 seconds he'd promised. Then, say whatever you want. You don't have rights to my pregnancy, she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of how level it was. You have no legal claim. That's not what I said. You said I wasn't leaving. I said you weren't leaving with my child. Those are different statements. He came around the desk slowly. Not aggressively. Just steadily. The way he moved through every room he occupied, like the room had been arranged for him, specifically. You want your independence. I understand that. It's one of the reasons I hired you. But Amara, and something in the way he said her name, not her title, not Ms. Bennett, just her name like he'd said it 100 times in private, that child is mine too. I know that, you know that, and I am not a man who walks away from what's mine. I'm not yours, she said sharply. No, he agreed. You're not, but the baby is. She hated that the distinction made sense. She hated that she couldn't immediately dismantle it. She hated that she was standing here at 8 in the morning, pregnancy hormones doing something unreasonable to her tear ducts, trying to hold this conversation together through sheer force of will. Like it or not, he said, you're staying. I know that baby is mine, and I'm not asking your permission to be involved. You don't get to make that decision for me. I'm not. I'm making it for the child. He stopped when he was about 3 feet from her. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion he was carrying underneath the control because Tae-Hyun was tired too, she realized. Onse. He had found out yesterday. He'd had one night to sit with this. Tell me one thing honestly, he said, not as my employee. Not in negotiation. Just honestly, do you believe I would be a man who abandons his child? She didn't answer immediately. Because honestly, she didn't. In 3 years, she had watched Kang Tae-Hyun conduct himself with a code that she sometimes disagreed with, sometimes found morally complicated, and occasionally found almost understandable. But he was not reckless. He was not cruel without reason. And he had never, not once in 3 years, walked away from a responsibility he had claimed. No, she said finally. He nodded, like that settled something. Then we figure this out, he said, together. Not the way you had planned, and probably not exactly the way I would have designed it, but together. Amara picked up her tablet from the desk. I want my own terms. Put them in writing. I want my position protected, no demotion, no reassignment, to something lesser that you're using to keep me inside the building. Fine. I want my own apartment. Not in this building, not somewhere your people can walk in without notice. You'll have security. My terms, she said. I want my own apartment. I'll accept security outside, not inside. He was quiet for a moment. That's going to be a problem given current circumstances. Then make it not a problem. You're the man who makes problems disappear. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile. Something smaller. You're already negotiating. I've been negotiating since I walked through that door. She met his eyes directly. I'm not your possession, Tae-Hyun. I'm the mother of your child. Those are completely different things, and how you understand that distinction is going to determine how this goes between us. He held her gaze for a long moment. Understood, he said. She went back to her office on the 28th floor and sat at her desk and did not move for approximately 4 minutes, which for Amara Bennett, who had not sat still without purpose in better part of a decade, was its own kind of earthquake. She had not won. She hadn't lost either. What she had done was survive the first conversation and arrive at a standoff that she could work with. She was good at working with standoffs. Her desk phone rang. She picked it up. Director-level security clearance has been added to your credentials, said Tae-Hyun's head of security, a man named Marcus, whose job she had once watched him perform for 16 continuous hours during a situation she was never allowed to discuss. Effective immediately. Mr. Kang's instructions. Thank you, Marcus. She hung up. He had already started. Not with pressure, not with restriction with access. She turned that over in her mind. She picked up her phone and texted her sister in Houston. Situation has changed. Not leaving, we'll explain later. Her sister's response came back in under a minute. Amara Denise Bennett, what did you do? She stared at the message for a moment. Then she put the phone face down on her desk and opened her laptop. She had work to do. The following 2 weeks were a study in controlled tension. Tae-Hyun, to his credit, did not immediately suffocate her. He gave her the apartment a place on the secured upper floors of a residence building 3 blocks from Kang Group headquarters that his organization maintained for various purposes she didn't ask about. The rooms were larger than her previous place. The kitchen was better equipped. There were 2 security personnel stationed at the building entrance whose names she learned on the first day because Amara made it her business to know the names of everyone orbiting her daily life. He arranged the medical care a private OB/GYN with a practice in Brentwood and a support team that operated with confidentiality agreements Amara herself reviewed before signing anything. The care was thorough and expensive, and she was honest enough with herself to be grateful for it, even as she resented that she needed to be. The resentment wasn't irrational. She knew that too. It was the specific resentment of a woman who had spent her entire adult life building independence brick by careful brick, and who now found herself in a situation where the resources surrounding her came attached to a man she had very deliberately not allowed herself to depend on. She and Tae-Hyun maintained their professional relationship during working hours with the same surface discipline they had always had. They had always worked well together. She managed his schedule with a precision that he had never once complained about, and he trusted her judgment on operational matters in a way that she recognized, even if it occasionally frustrated the lieutenants who resented her access. None of that changed. What changed was the space between them. She became aware of it gradually, then all at once. The way his eyes tracked to her when she walked into the conference room. The way he occasionally found reasons to speak to her directly rather than through the intermediary of his assistant. The way he sometimes paused before leaving her office, like there was something he was deciding whether or not to say. She didn't address it. She was 4 months pregnant, navigating an arrangement that could collapse at any moment, and she did not have the bandwidth for anything beyond what was directly in front of her. Then the thing she had not anticipated walked through the door. She heard about Park Do-jin, the way she heard about most things in Tae-Hyun's world in fragments, through the texture of conversations she was adjacent to rather than included in. A rival organization. Territory disputes along the eastern edges of the city's distribution networks. A man whose business was built on the same structural foundations as Tae-Hyun's, but who operated with considerably less discipline. She didn't concern herself with it. It was outside her lane, and she kept her lane clean. Then Marcus came to her office on a Tuesday morning and placed a single photograph on her desk. It was a picture of her, getting into her car outside the medical building in Brentwood. "When was this taken?" she asked. 3 days ago. Marcus's voice had no particular inflection. He was good at that. "We found it in a cache of surveillance materials that one of our field assets recovered from Do-jin's operation. You've been identified as a person of interest to his organization." Amara looked at the photograph for a moment. "Then how did they connect me to Mr. Kang beyond employment?" "We believe there's an internal source," Marcus said. "Someone who has been providing Do-jin's people with information about Mr. Kang's personal arrangements." She looked up from the photograph. "Someone inside Kang Group. That's our current assessment." She set the photograph face down on her desk. Her mind was already moving through the architecture of who had access to what, who had known about her arrangements, who had reason to sell that knowledge. "I need a list of everyone who was aware of the details of my medical and residential situation," she said. "Everyone, not just the inner circle." Marcus hesitated for exactly 1 second. "That list would include people with significant seniority." "I understand that," she said. "I need it anyway." He gave her the list by noon. She had a name circled by 3 o'clock. She went to Tae-Hyun's office at 4:15. His assistant was there this time. But Amara walked past her with a look that communicated there was not going to be a discussion about scheduling. She closed the door behind her and set the circled list on his desk. He looked at it. Something happened behind his eyes that was very quiet and very cold. "You're sure?" he asked. "I'm not a detective," she said. "I'm sure that this is the person with the specific combination of access and motive that makes them the most likely candidate. What you do with that is outside my scope." He picked up the list. His hand was very still. "Who else knows you identified this?" he asked. "Nobody." He looked at her over the paper. You came straight to me. You're the person who needs to know, she said simply. I don't make moves in your world without telling you first. That's the arrangement. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite gratitude, something more complicated. Sit down, he said. Please, he said. And that was unusual enough that she sat. He sat too, which was also unusual. He rarely sat when he was in a working mode, preferred to stand, preferred to move. He put the list on the desk between them and looked at it for a moment. Dujin is building something, he said. Not a confrontation. He knows he can't win direct. He's building a media situation. Something that makes it look like you received special treatment because of a personal relationship. To make it look like I've compromised my organization over a woman. Amara absorbed that, which is what you're trying to avoid by keeping our arrangement professional. Which is what I'm trying to avoid, he confirmed. But it doesn't matter how carefully we handle it internally if someone inside is feeding him details. He looked at her directly. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as information, not as pressure. She waited. The most effective way to destroy what he's building is to control the story ourselves. To get ahead of it. He paused. That means publicly acknowledging you. The pregnancy. What we are. What are we, she asked. That's a fair question. He didn't look away. I don't know the full answer yet. But I know what we're not. We're not something I'm hiding. I don't hide things that matter. The word landed somewhere she wasn't prepared for it. Matter. She pressed it down. You're saying you want to make a public statement. I'm saying I think it would be strategically effective, he said. And I'm saying it should be your decision, not mine. He leaned back slightly. You said at the beginning that the difference between being a possession and being the mother of my child was about how I understood the distinction. This is me trying to understand it. She looked at him for a long moment. Tae-Hyun was not a man who asked. He decided and he directed and he moved forward. She had watched him operate like that for 3 years. This was different. Give me 48 hours, she said. He nodded. You have them. She stood up. She was almost at the door when he said her name. She stopped, didn't turn around immediately. I've known for a while, he said, that the night wasn't something I regret. I want you to know that. She didn't answer. She walked out. But she stood in the elevator for the full 45 seconds without looking at her phone, without reviewing any messages, without doing anything except pressing her palm flat against the cool metal wall and breathing carefully. She spent the 48 hours in her apartment, which she had quietly arranged in a way that no longer felt temporary. She'd hung a print she'd bought at a street market in Silver Lake. She had a coffee maker she cared about. She had a stack of books on the nightstand that had been partially read and dog-eared, in ways that meant she was actually living there. She sat on her couch at midnight on the second day and was honest with herself. She had been planning to leave. The plan had been good. The plan made sense. Remove yourself from the situation. Protect your independence. Build your own version of this without being absorbed into his gravity. But she had already been absorbed into it. 3 years ago, the first time she walked into that building and shook his hand and realized that she found him genuinely interesting instead of simply powerful. She had kept that realization at arm's length for a long time, but it had been there. She was not in love with him. She was clear about that. Love was not what this was yet, and she was not going to lie to herself about what stage she was at. But she wasn't running either. She had stopped running. She had agreed to terms that kept her here, and she had been, if she was honest, more than simply resigned to those terms. She had chosen them. That was the part she kept arriving back at. The plan had been escape, and she had given it up. And the reason she had given it up was not only about the baby, and not only about resources, and not only about the pragmatic reality that Tae-Hyun Kang was going to be part of her child's life regardless of geography. She had given up the plan because part of her wanted to see what came next. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did what she always did when she had something she didn't know what to do with. She set it aside in the room where she kept things that would require more time, and she went back to what was directly in front of her. She picked up her phone and called her sister. I'm staying, she said. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then, is it him or the baby? Amara leaned back against the couch cushions and looked at the ceiling. Both, she said. I don't entirely understand it. You never do, her sister said. That's kind of the whole point. The next morning, she walked into Tae-Hyun's office without knocking. He was on a call. He ended it when he saw her face. She said, "The statement. On my terms." He was very still. "What are your terms? I speak," she said. "Not your publicist. Not a prepared statement that your team clears. I say what's true in language I choose." She paused. "Which means I'm telling people this was unexpected. That the circumstances were complicated. That we're still figuring out what we are to each other. I'm not performing a love story for your PR strategy. I wouldn't ask you to." "Good." She sat down in the chair across from his desk, not because he told her to, but because she chose to. "I'm also going to need you to deal with whoever is feeding Dojin information before the statement goes out. I want that hole closed first. It'll be handled today. And I want to be in the room when you decide how it's handled," she said. That surprised him. She saw it. "Why?" "Because you said we were figuring this out together," she said. "I want to understand what together actually means in your world before I commit to it." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "You'll be in the room." She nodded. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up at him. "For what it's worth," she said, "I don't regret it either." She stood up and left his office before he could answer. But walking back toward the elevator, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't peace exactly. It was something smaller and more honest than peace. It was the feeling of having made a choice, her choice. And for a woman who had spent the last month feeling like everything was being decided around her, that feeling was worth more than she had words for. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. 45 seconds, she thought. She counted all of them. The statement went out on a Thursday. Not a press release. Not a carefully staged photograph with a publicist's fingerprints all over every word. Amara had been clear about that, and Tae-Hyun had kept his word, which was something she was still adjusting to. The fact that when Kang Tae-Hyun said he would do something, he did it exactly the way he said he would. She wrote the statement herself, at her kitchen table, at 6 in the morning, with a cup of tea that had gone cold, because she kept forgetting to drink it. She wrote it 4 times. The first version was too defensive. The second was too careful. The third was technically accurate, but read like a legal document, which makes sense, because that was the mode her brain defaulted to under pressure. The 4th version was the one she sent him. It said that she and Kang Tae-Hyun had worked together for 3 years in a professional capacity. It said that over the course of that relationship, something personal had developed that neither of them had planned for. It said that she was pregnant, that the pregnancy was real and ongoing, and that they were both committed to the child's well-being. It said that the circumstances were complicated, and that she wasn't going to pretend otherwise, because pretending was something she didn't do. She read it one final time before she sent it. Then she pressed send before she could revise it a 5th time. Tae-Hyun called her 7 minutes later. "It's good," he said. "I know," she said, a pause. "You're not nervous." "I'm terrified," she said. "That's different from nervous. Nervous is when you're unsure about the outcome. Terrified is when you're sure the outcome is going to be very loud, and you're still doing it anyway." He was quiet for a moment. The hole is closed. She had been in the room. He had kept that promise too. It was a conference room on the 26th floor, and it was her, Tae-Hyun, Marcus, and the man whose name she had circled on the list, a senior logistics coordinator named Daniel Rhee, who had been with Kang Group for 6 years, and who, it turned out, had been on Dojin's payroll for the last 8 months. Rhee had looked at Amara when he walked in and understood immediately who had found him. She saw it in the way his eyes moved to her face and then quickly away. Tae-Hyun had been very controlled. That was the thing about him in those moments. The colder the situation, the quieter he became. He'd asked Rhee 3 questions. Rhee had answered all 3, because Tae-Hyun had a way of making people understand that lying was going to be considerably less comfortable than the truth. The hole was closed. Rhee was gone. The information flow to Dojin's organization had been cut. But the damage from those 8 months was already loose in the world, and the statement going out Thursday meant it was going to hit the news cycle within hours. It hit within 4. Amara's phone ran out of battery at 2 in the afternoon because she had stopped paying attention to the charge level while she was managing the incoming volume of messages, calls, and alerts that came after 3 separate entertainment news outlets picked up the story. She plugged it in at her desk and took exactly 6 minutes to go stand in the bathroom and look at herself in the mirror and breathe through her nose until her pulse stopped doing the thing it was doing. Then she went back to her desk. The coverage was she had expected worse. Most of it was the predictable framework of a powerful CEO and his secretary, with all the language that particular framing carried. There were people who assumed the relationship was coercive, which made her jaw tight in a very specific way. There were people who assumed she was calculating, which she had also expected, and which annoyed her less, because calculation was not inherently an insult. There was a piece in a business publication that was actually thoughtful, written by a journalist who had clearly done more than the minimum research. It noted that Amara's professional history before Kang Group was significant, that her responsibilities within the organization had expanded substantially beyond her original position, and that framing her purely as a secretary missed a meaningful amount of context. She read that one twice. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tae-Hyun. "How are you?" She stared at it for a moment. 2 years ago, she would have said he didn't text. Then a year ago, she would have said he didn't text conversationally. Now here he was. Managing, she typed back, "My 3 p.m. moved. I can be in your office at 3 if you need to brief." She almost said no on instinct. Saying no was the default when Tae-Hyun offered proximity, because proximity had always felt like the thing she needed to manage the distance of. "Fine," she sent instead. He arrived at 3:01. He had a folder, and she had a screen full of press monitoring, and neither of them mentioned the fact that he had offered to come to her office rather than summoning her to his, which they both understood was not how he normally operated. They worked for 2 hours, sorted through what needed responses, what needed to be left alone, what required legal attention, and what was simply noise that would exhaust itself. They were good at this, the actual work of it, had always been good at it. Whatever the complicated texture of the personal situation between them, their professional rhythm was clean and practiced and efficient in a way that Amara had always found genuinely satisfying. At 5 o'clock, he closed the folder and looked at her. "You should eat something," he said. "I've eaten." "When?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "At some point today," she said. "That's not an answer." He stood up. "I'm having dinner brought to the executive floor. Come up." "Tae-Hyun, you're 5 months pregnant. You've had a very bad day, and you haven't eaten since whatever vague point in time, at some point today refers to." He looked at her steadily. "Come up for dinner, that's all." She came up. It was not a romantic dinner. It was takeout containers from a Korean restaurant that she happened to know he had used the same standing order from for 2 years, spread across his conference table, while the city did its evening darkening outside the windows. They ate and they debriefed, and occasionally they sat in silence, and it was not uncomfortable. She didn't know what to do with that. The fragile steadiness of the next 2 weeks lasted, until the morning Marcus appeared in Amara's office doorway, wearing the particular expression that meant something had gone wrong, in a way that had not yet been fully quantified. "Dujin," he said, "bail violation. Was supposed to surrender his passport as a condition of his release. Our legal intelligence suggests he didn't." Amara set down her coffee. "Meaning he's still operating. Meaning the federal case against his organization has a complication." Marcus came fully into the office and closed the door. "And meaning that whatever he was building, before we cut off some version of it, may still be in motion." She absorbed that. "What does Tae-Hyun know?" "He's being briefed right now." She nodded. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet," Marcus said. "But I wanted you aware. Because if Dujin still has usable intelligence about your situation." He stopped. "Say it," Amara said. "You remain the most accessible angle," Marcus said. "You're more visible than you were 3 months ago." The statement made that unavoidable. She looked at him steadily. "I'm aware of that. Mr. Kang is going to want to move your residential arrangement," Marcus said. "Back to the residence building. Closer security." There it was. She had known something like this was coming. She had known it, and she had also spent the last several weeks getting genuinely settled in an apartment that was hers, that operated on her terms, that did not have security personnel visible every time she looked out her window. "He can want that," she said. "Tell him to make his case to me directly." Marcus nodded. He didn't argue. That was one of the things she had come to respect about Marcus. He understood the difference between his authority and hers. He left. She sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then she picked up her coffee and drank it, even though it had gone slightly cool. Tae-Hyun made his case to her directly. That same afternoon, in her office, standing near the window, not quite pacing but moving in the controlled way he moved when he was restraining something larger. "I'm not telling you it's a demand," he said. "I'm telling you it's necessary. There's no meaningful difference between those things when you're the one saying them," she said. "There is a difference. A demand would mean I'm telling you to do it regardless of what you think. Necessary means I'm telling you that the risk calculus has changed, and I need you to take it seriously." "I take it seriously," she said. "I also take seriously the fact that moving me into your building is not a securities decision. It's a control decision dressed up as a security decision." His jaw tightened. "That's not what this is. Then explain to me why the distance of 3 blocks is not manageable with adjusted security protocols." "Because Marcus gave me the threat assessment, and nothing in it specifically says the current distance is the operational problem." "The operational problem," he said, and his voice had gone to the flat register she associated with the edges of his patience, "is that you are carrying my child, and someone who wants to destroy me has identified you as the vector through which to do it. The 3-block distance is 3 blocks where my people have to cover ground that I cannot fully control. That's the problem. Your people have covered more complicated ground than 3 city blocks." "Amara," he said it like a full stop, "I'm asking you." She looked at him. He was tired. She'd been watching the exhaustion build in him over the last 2 weeks, the way he carried it in his shoulders, the way his stillness had a tension underneath it that hadn't been there before. Tae-Hyun operated best when he had control of the variables, and the Dojin situation was a variable that kept refusing to resolve the way it should. She was one of the variables. She hated that. She hated being a variable in someone else's risk equation, even when she understood why. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's not—" "It's what you're getting today," she said, and her voice wasn't hard, but it was clear. "I'll think about it. You'll have an answer by tomorrow morning." He looked at her for a long moment. She met his eyes and didn't move. "Tomorrow morning," he said, and he left. She didn't sleep well. The baby had decided this was a night for significant activity, which made rest theoretical rather than practical, and her mind was running 2 tracks, simultaneously the practical track that was evaluating security protocols and threat assessments, and the terms under which she could a change in living situation without surrendering the independence. She'd spent 3 years defending, and the other track, the one she kept trying to close, that was thinking about the look on Tae-Hyun's face when he said, "I'm asking you." He had not asked her things before this situation began. Directed and decided and expected. The asking was new, and the asking was the part that was the most complicated, because asking implied that her answer set had genuine weight in his decision-making, and that implication changed the geometry of the whole situation. She had built her defenses around a man who controlled. The asking moved the target. At 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and made herself tea and sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, which was how she processed things that she couldn't resolve in the regular architecture of her mind. She wrote 2 columns. On one side, reasons to stay in the current apartment. On the other, reasons to move. The reasons to stay were about independence and principle, and the line she'd drawn at the beginning about what this arrangement was and wasn't. The reasons to move were shorter and blunter. Her pregnancy was now 6 months advanced. There was a man who had identified her as a useful tool against someone she was now, whether she liked the word or not, genuinely involved with. And the person asking her to accept more security was, even with all the complication, even with everything she was still working through, not asking out of control. He was asking out of fear. She set the legal pad down and looked at that recognition for a moment. Kang Tae-Hyun was afraid. Not of Dojin. She didn't think he was capable of fear in the conventional sense when it came to professional threats. He was afraid of something happening to her, to the baby. He was afraid of losing something before he'd finished understanding what it was. She was not entirely different, she realized. In the morning, she texted Marcus. "I'll move. My terms, my own floor plan. No shared walls with security personnel. Kitchen access independent. I want it in writing before I pack a single thing." Marcus replied in 4 minutes. "Understood. It'll be ready by end of day." 15 seconds later, her phone buzzed again. Tae-Hyun's name on the screen. "Thank you." 2 words. She stared at them for longer than 2 words warranted. She put her phone down and started making a list of what to pack. The new apartment was on the 14th floor of the residence building. It had floor-to-ceiling windows on the south side, a kitchen that was demonstrably better than the previous one, and the print from Silver Lake already hanging on the wall. When she walked in on the first day, which meant someone had taken it from the old place and rehung it, and she chose not to examine too closely who had arranged that. The security personnel were stationed in the corridor outside, not in the apartment. The terms she had put in writing were honored. She put her books on the nightstand. She arranged the coffee maker on the kitchen counter. She placed her shoes in the closet in the order she had always kept them. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and put her hands on her stomach and told herself she was still choosing this, that it wasn't being done to her, that the distinction still existed. She half believed herself, which was better than not believing herself at all, so she kept going. The uneasy peace of those 2 weeks snapped 12 days after she moved. It snapped in a board meeting. Not the kind she normally attended. This was a session for Tae-Hyun's senior inner circle, the men and women who knew the full shape of what Kang Group actually was, not just the publicly presentable version. Amara had been included in 3 of these since her position had expanded. She knew who was in the room and what the room contained. What she had not expected was to walk in and find that Jin-Soo Park, the man who had been Tae-Hyun's second-in-command for 9 years, the man who had been the organization's operational center for longer than Amara had known, Tae-Hyun existed, was not at the table. She took her seat. She watched the room. She said nothing. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Tae-Hyun ran it with his usual controlled efficiency, and everyone around the table performed their usual deferences, and the absence of Jin-Soo Park was not addressed once. She waited until the room emptied. "Where is Jin-Soo?" she asked. Tae-Hyun was gathering papers. He didn't look up immediately. "Reassigned," he said. "To what?" "Oversight of the Northern Distribution Network." She looked at him. "That's 4 levels below his current position." "Yes, Tae-Hyun." She waited until he looked at her. What did he do? The pause was just long enough to tell her it was something significant. "He knew about Tae-Hyun said finally. "Not everything, but enough. He knew there was a leak, and he didn't bring it to me." She sat back in her chair. The implications moved through her fast. Jin-Soo Park had known there was a leak, had known information was getting to Jin, had not told Tae-Hyun. "Why?" she asked. "He thought he could manage it himself," Tae-Hyun said. "He thought he could identify the source and close it without involving me." He thought. He stopped. Started again. "He's been making decisions that should have come to me for 18 months. Not maliciously. He convinced himself he was protecting the organization, that I had enough to carry. He was protecting you," she said. "He was deciding for me," Tae-Hyun said. And the edge in his voice was something she recognized as the specific anger of a man who had just discovered that someone he trusted completely had been making unilateral decisions about what he needed to know, which is not the same thing. She heard the echo of her own words to him months ago in a different context. "How I understand that distinction is going to determine how this goes between us." She didn't say it. It wasn't the moment. "How is he taking the reassignment?" she asked instead. "Badly." Tae-Hyun looked at the table. "We've known each other for 16 years. She let that sit for a moment, because that was the part that deserved space, not the organizational decision, which she understood and thought was probably correct. But the weight of 16 years and the specific grief of finding out that someone who knew you well had still chosen to make themselves a wall between you and the truth. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked up at her with a slight expression of surprise, like he'd expected almost any other response from her, except that one. "Doesn't change the decision," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm still sorry." Jin-Soo Park was not a man who accepted reassignment quietly. She learned from this a week later, not from Tae-Hyun and not from Marcus, but from a conversation she overheard in the hallway outside the 27th floor conference room, a conversation between 2 of the organization's regional coordinators, conducted in the specific low register of people who were saying things they would not say if they were certain they were being heard. The words that caught her were, "Jin-Soo says the secretary is why Tae-Hyun's making decisions with his gut instead of his head." She stopped walking. "He's been distracted since she announced the pregnancy." Jin-Soo says if she wasn't in the picture, the situation would have been handled 6 months earlier. That he knew about it, but was waiting on Jin-Soo to bring a clean resolution. because Tae-Hyun was too occupied with the woman's situation to be bothered. She stood in the hallway and she heard this, and she kept her face completely still, and she did not make a sound. The two coordinators moved around the corner and were gone. She stood there for another 10 seconds. Then she walked back toward the elevator, because she needed to be somewhere that was not that corridor. She was furious. She knew she was furious because the fury had a texture she recognized, cold and very precise, settling into her chest like something with weight. Not the hot kind of angry that expressed itself immediately. The other kind. The kind she was most dangerous with. Jin-Soo Park was telling people that she was the reason Tae-Hyun had been compromised. He was building a narrative. Not with Do-jin, the external threat had always been Do-jin's construction. This was internal. This was someone inside the organization who had lost his position and had the most effective way to reclaim it was to make the case that the problem was her. She thought about going to Tae-Hyun. She thought about it for approximately 45 minutes, sitting in her office with the door closed, before she decided no. Not yet. Because going to Tae-Hyun meant making this his problem to solve, and she was not a woman who handed her problems to powerful men to resolve. She had never been that woman, and she was not going to become her now. She pulled up the organizational chart on her screen. She looked at who reported to Jin-Soo's previous position. She thought about who in the room had the access and the institutional relationships that would make them the most useful people to speak with. Then she opened her laptop and started doing what she was actually very good at, which was building a complete and documented picture of exactly what was happening. She had been building that picture for 4 days when Do-jin moved. It came as a message to Tae-Hyun, a specific channel, a specific format that indicated it was meant to be taken as direct and personal. Marcus briefed her within the hour because Tae-Hyun had extended her briefing access to all threat-level communications after the re-situation. The message said, "Come alone, Warehouse District, South End. Tonight, or I use what I have on the woman, and the organization pays the price publicly." She read the briefing summary. Twice. Then she went to Tae-Hyun's office without the tablet, without the professional framing, without anything except herself, walking through that door at 11 in the morning. He was on the phone. He ended the call when he saw her face. "You're not going," she said. "Amar, listen to me." She came to stand directly in front of his desk. "I have spent 4 days documenting the fact that Jin-Soo Park is working the inside of this organization to undermine your confidence in your current decision-making. I have names, dates, and specific conversations. That situation is connected to this one because Do-jin doesn't have the internal intelligence to move on you like this without someone feeding it to him. And the most recent source, with both the knowledge and the motive, is the man you demoted 3 weeks ago." Tae-Hyun was very still. "How long have you known about Jin-Soo's movement?" he asked. 4 days. "Why didn't you bring it to me?" "Because I wanted something documented, not a suspicion," she said. "And because I wanted to understand it fully before I handed it over." She put the folder she'd been carrying under her arm onto his desk. "It's all there." He opened the folder. He didn't read it. All he flipped through it in the fast, comprehensive way he had with dense information, pulling the key threads without losing the detail. She watched his face. "Jin-Soo gave Do-jin the warehouse location," he said. "Not a question." "That's my conclusion," she said. "It's in the folder." "You think it's a trap?" "I think it's obviously a trap," she said. "I think Do-jin is desperate and running out of options, and Jin-Soo is giving him whatever he needs to create a situation where you make an irreversible mistake." Tae-Hyun closed the folder. He set both hands flat on the desk. He looked at her. "I'm going anyway," he said. She stared at him. "Did you hear? I heard you," he said. "Everything you've documented is accurate. It is a trap. Do-jin is desperate, Jin-Soo is feeding him, and going alone to that warehouse is an extremely bad strategic decision." He paused. "And I'm still going, because if I don't, he releases whatever he's holding, and the collateral to this organization and to you is worse than whatever he's planning for me in a warehouse. You can't. My security team will be in position before I walk in," he said. "They will not go in with me. They will be there. I am not walking into that building without an extraction plan." He stood up from the desk. "I'm not asking you to agree with this decision. I'm telling you what I've decided because you're owed that." She felt the cold fury move differently in her chest. This was not the Jin-Soo fury, which was about betrayal and politics. This was something closer and sharper. "You have a child," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. In 7 weeks, you have a child. I know. And you're walking into a building where someone wants two. I know, Amara. He came around the desk. He stopped when he was close, not intrusive, just present. I know. She looked at him. She was not going to cry. She was categorically not going to cry in this office, in this conversation, in front of this man. She had cried exactly once in his presence in 8 months, and she was not adding to that count. Come back, she said. It came out simpler than she meant it. Simpler and more exposed. Something shifted in his face. I'm going to come back, he said. That's not a promise you can make. No, he agreed quietly. It's not. They stood in that silence. Amara's hand moved without her deciding it, pressing flat against her stomach in the way it did now, when she was processing something too large. The reflex of a woman who had spent months renegotiating what she was afraid of. Tae-Hyun watched her do it. I need you to stay here tonight, he said. In the building. Not for my reasons for the security protocol. If something goes wrong at the warehouse, I need to know exactly where you are, and that Marcus has direct access. Fine, she said. And I need you to not do anything unilateral, he said. Whatever you're thinking about doing, don't do it without telling Marcus first. She looked at him. I mean it, he said. I heard you. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he picked up the folder from his desk. This is good work, he said. This is you didn't have to do this. Yes, I did, she said. He nodded once. He moved toward the door. Tae-Hyun. She said it before she made a decision to say it. He stopped. She looked at him standing in his office, in the city he ran, with everything he'd built around him, and the folder she'd given him in his hand, and she understood with a clarity that was almost physical, that she had passed the point where any of her original plans were recoverable. She was not going to leave. She was not going to protect herself by maintaining distance. She was not going to be the woman who stood at a professional remove and watched this man walk into a building where someone wanted to destroy him and feel nothing. She already felt too much. She had already been feeling too much for longer than she'd admitted to herself or anyone else. And standing in this office at 11 in the morning, with 7 weeks left in her pregnancy, and a man she had spent 8 months carefully not loving, walking toward a warehouse trap, she finally stopped, pretending that the careful part was still working. Be careful, she said. It was inadequate. It was the smallest, most ordinary thing she could have said. He held the doorframe for a moment. I'll call you when it's done, he said. Then he was gone, and Amara stood alone in his office and pressed both hands flat against her stomach and waited for the sound of the building around her to feel like something other than the loudest silence she had ever stood inside. The call did not come at the time Tae-Hyun had said it would. He had said he would call when it was done. He had not specified a time, which in retrospect Amara recognized as the careful language of a man who understood he could not promise a timeline, but wanted to give her something to hold on to anyway. She had understood that. She had accepted it. What she had not prepared for was 4 hours of silence. She sat in her apartment on the 14th floor, and she waited. She had her laptop open, and she was not reading anything on it. She had her phone on the cushion next to her, at a volume that would have woken her from a dead sleep. The city outside the windows went through its evening sequence, the light changing, the traffic thickening and then thinning. The particular quality of Los Angeles, dark that was never fully dark because of the ambient glow of 10 million people living their lives at full brightness. At hour 2, she got up and made tea she didn't drink. At hour 3, she called Marcus. He's in position, Marcus said immediately, which meant he'd been waiting for her call. Entered the warehouse 40 minutes ago. My team has the perimeter. I'll know something within the next 30 minutes. Are your people inside? Not yet. His instruction was to hold unless the situation deteriorated. Define deteriorated, she said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Gunfire, or silence past the agreed window. She pressed her palm flat against the kitchen counter. What's the agreed window? 20 minutes from point of contact. How long ago was point of contact? Another pause. 38 minutes. She heard what he wasn't saying. Marcus, we're monitoring, he said. I'll call you the moment I have something. She hung up. She put the phone on the counter. She looked at it. Then she went and sat back down on the couch, and she did something she almost never did. She stopped moving. Not because she had decided to be still, because her body had simply arrived at the limit of what it could productively do, and the only option left was to sit inside the waiting and not fight it. Her hand was on her stomach. She had stopped noticing when that had become the default position. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. It was Marcus. "He's out," Marcus said. "He's in the vehicle. There was a confrontation. It went physical. He's got a cut above his left eye and a bruised rib situation. Nothing critical. He's coming back now," Amara exhaled. It came out longer than she expected, the way a breath does when it's been held for 4 hours without acknowledgement. "Doo-jin?" she asked. "In custody," Marcus said. "Violated bail conditions in front of witnesses and federal contacts." "It's done." "Jinsu?" A shorter pause being handled. She didn't ask what that meant. She said thank you, and she hung up, and she sat in the silence of the apartment for approximately 90 seconds before the door opened and Tae-Hyun walked in. He looked worse than the description. The cut above his left eye had bled enough to stain the collar of his shirt before someone had pressed something against it, and the something had been applied hastily, which meant the skin around it was still raw. He was moving slightly carefully the way people move when a rib is the problem, and the body is trying to route around the pain without drawing attention to the compensation. His jacket was gone. His expression was the specific kind of closed that came after something that had cost something real. She was standing by the couch when he walked in. She had stood up when she heard the door. He stopped when he saw her. They looked at each other across the apartment. She crossed the room. She didn't think about crossing it, her body simply moved, covering the distance between them in the direct way she did everything. And when she reached him, she put one hand against the uninjured side of his face and looked at the cut above his eye, with the practical focus of a woman assessing damage. "Sit down," she said. He sat. That he sat without arguing told her more about the state he was in than anything else could have. She went to the bathroom. She came back with the first aid kit she had put in the bathroom 3 months ago, because she was a woman who believed in preparation and had always known, on some level, that living adjacent to Tae-Hyun's world meant eventually needing one. She sat on the coffee table in front of him, which put her at eye level with the cut. She cleaned it. He stayed still while she did it, which she appreciated. She had half expected him to wave her off. He was a man who did not easily accept being tended to, but he held still, with his hands loose on his knees, and he let her work. "How bad is the rib?" she asked. "Bruised, not cracked." He paused. "Probably. You should have it confirmed. In the morning." She pressed a small butterfly closure over the cut and leaned back to assess it. It would hold. It would leave a small scar probably, which she recognized with a complicated internal sensation as something she did not want to think about too directly right now. She put the kit aside. She was still sitting on the coffee table in front of him, close at eye level. He was looking at her. "You waited up," he said, obviously. "You didn't have to." She looked at him steadily. "I know I didn't have to." He was quiet for a moment. Something in his face shifted not dramatically. The way things didn't shift dramatically with Tae-Hyun, but enough that she could read it. The exhaustion underneath the control. Something else under that. "It was Jinsu," he said. "You were right about all of it. He's been in contact with Do-jin for 6 weeks. After the demotion, he decided that if the organization collapsed, at least it wouldn't be on terms that left me in charge of what came after." She heard that. She sat with it. "He wanted the organization to survive," she said. "Just without you running it." "That's the charitable reading," Tae-Hyun said. "The other reading is that he was angry, and he had access, and he made a catastrophic decision, because he thought he knew better than I did about what the organization needed." He paused. "He told Do-jin about the warehouse tonight." The setup was Jinsu's suggestion. Do-jin provided the ultimatum. The whole architecture of tonight was Jinsu's design. She looked at him. She was thinking about 16 years of professional partnership, the weight of that, the specific grief she had seen on his face in the conference room when he talked about it. And she was thinking about the fact that Tae-Hyun had walked into a building tonight knowing it was professional by someone who had been his closest professional ally for more than a decade. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Not about the rib? Not about the cut?" He understood the question. "No," he said, which was not the answer she expected. "I will be. But right now, no." She nodded. She didn't offer anything to fill the space, because filling spaces was not what the moment needed. She let it be what it was. After a moment, he said, "I'm sorry you had to wait." "Don't apologize for that," she said. "You came back. That's the thing." He looked at her with an expression she recognized, now the one she had started to be able to read in the last few months, The one that happened when she said something that reached past the constructed exterior to whatever lived underneath it. She stood up from the coffee table. You should sleep. Amara, she stopped. Thank you, he said, for the folder. For all of it, he paused. You didn't have to do any of that. You keep saying that, she said, because it's true. She looked at him sitting on her couch, injured and exhausted and honest, in the way he was only honest when he was too tired to manage the distance. Get some sleep, she said. We'll talk in the morning. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of him settling in the apartment, and she thought about the fact that she was listening for him, that his presence in the other room was a comfort rather than an intrusion, and she thought about what that meant. She knew what it meant. She was just not ready to say it out loud yet. The morning brought clarity, and the clarity brought complications. The news cycle caught the warehouse incident within 12 hours, not the specifics, but enough. Park Do-jin arrested. Bail violation. Alleged extortion attempt against a prominent LA businessman. The story was handled cleanly on their end, the legal team managing the public framing, while Marcus managed the internal documentation. Do-jin's organization was in its final stages of collapse, federal investigators already embedded in the proceedings before the warehouse event had given them additional material to work with. On the surface, resolved. Below the surface, which was where Amara had always done her best thinking, the situation was not resolved. It was entering a new phase, one that had a different texture from what had come before, and she could feel the texture changing before she had the language to describe exactly how. She came into Tae-Hyun's office 3 days after the warehouse, with a proposal she had been building in the hours she spent not sleeping. I want to formalize my position, she said. He looked up from his desk. You promoted me to Director of Strategic Operations 6 weeks ago, she said. The title exists, but the structural authority hasn't followed it. I've been doing the work with provisional access that gets renegotiated every time I need something. I want it codified. Reporting structure, decision-making authority, scope of operations, all of it in writing, with the organizational chart updated to reflect the actual hierarchy. He studied her. Why now? Because after tonight, after the last 3 months, the informal arrangement doesn't work anymore. I need to know where I stand in this organization as a professional independent of where I stand in your life as whatever I am. She held his gaze. Those two things can't keep bleeding into each other. I need them separated by structure. They're not separable, he said. You know that. I know the reality isn't fully separable, she said. I'm asking for the structure anyway, because the structure is what will protect both of us when the reality gets complicated. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. Write up what you want, he said. I'll review it by end of week. She had it on his desk in 24 hours. He reviewed it, made 2 amendments she found reasonable, and signed it. Director of Strategic Operations, Kang Group Holdings. Reporting directly to the CEO. Full authority within defined operational scope. No provisional access. Permanent. She read her own name on the document and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsteady for months. The week that followed was the closest thing to normal she had experienced, since the morning she stood in her bathroom, holding a pregnancy test and watching her original plan dissolve. She worked. She managed her operational scope with the methodical focus she had always brought to her professional life, the difference being that now the scope was honest. She wasn't performing a limited role while doing something larger underneath it. The authority was real, and she used it cleanly, and the organization adjusted, with varying degrees of grace, to what she actually was. Tae-Hyun gave her room to work. He did not hover. He did not second-guess her decisions within her scope. He was, professionally, exactly the man she had always found most useful, someone who hired capable people and let them be capable. Personally, the thing between them continued to develop in the slow, real way of things that haven't been forced into a shape before they were ready. He came to her apartment on a Tuesday evening with food from the Korean restaurant, and they ate at the kitchen table and talked for 2 hours about things that were not work. Her family in Atlanta, the sister who texted her every 3 days with escalating levels of concern, his childhood in a city that existed at a very different angle from the Los Angeles he now ran, the way fatherhood looked from inside the approaching proximity of it. Are you afraid of it? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Of being responsible for someone I can't control the environment of. You can't control everything. I know that intellectually, he said. Functionally, I've spent 20 years operating as though I can control enough. She looked at him across the table. You can't control him. Him, Tae-Hyun said. And something in his face did the small shift that she had come to understand, was the closest he came to unguarded. Him, she confirmed. We're having a boy. She had known for 3 weeks. She had been deciding how to tell him, and had not quite gotten there, and apparently her body had decided the moment for her. He put his fork down. He looked at her. You knew, he said. 3 weeks. Why didn't you? Because I needed to sit with it myself first, she said. Before it became something we shared. She held his gaze. I needed it to be mine for a little while. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay, just that. Okay. Without the wounded register that another man might have brought to 3 weeks of withheld information, without the pressure to justify herself further. Just the single word that meant he understood the principle, even if it had cost him something. She thought, not for the first time, that Kang Tae-Hyun was a considerably more complicated man than his reputation allowed for. A boy, he said. A boy, she confirmed. He picked up his fork again. But she could see the thing he was holding, the weight of it, the reality of it settling into him, like something that was going to change the architecture of how he moved through the world. She understood that. She had been living inside that particular restructuring for 6 months. The mountain estate was his idea. He proposed it on a Friday morning, formally, in her office, which she appreciated. The formality meant he was treating it as a request rather than a decision he'd already made. 3 days, he said, outside the city. There's a property in the San Bernardino range I've maintained for years. No staff. Minimal security footprint. He paused. You've been carrying a lot. I think we both have. I'd like to offer you somewhere that isn't inside the gravitational field of all of this for a few days. She thought about it for less time than she expected. Okay, she said. He blinked. She had the impression he had prepared for more negotiation. Okay, he said. Yes, Tae-Hyun, okay. She turned back to her screen. I'll clear my schedule for Monday through Wednesday. The estate was not what she had expected, and she had expected something significant. It was a low, sprawling structure, built into the hillside in a way that felt like it had grown there rather than been constructed heavy timber, stone, walls of glass that made the outside feel like a continuous part of the inside. Nothing ostentatious. No evidence of the kind of wealth that needed to announce itself. Space and quiet, and the specific quality of mountain air that reminded her how constantly she had been breathing recycled city air for months. She stood on the rear terrace on the first morning and felt the tension she had been carrying and her shoulders had been carrying. For so long she had stopped noticing it as tension and had started categorizing it as her baseline began to loosen. Tae-Hyun came out with coffee. He handed her a cup and stood beside her and looked at the view. This is where you come when it gets to be too much, she said. Not a question, when I can, he said, which is not often enough. She wrapped both hands around the cup. How long have you owned it? 11 years. Bought it the year I took full control of the organization. He paused. I told myself it was a strategic asset, that I needed a secure location outside the city for contingency planning. Was it? The first year, maybe. After that, it was just where I came, when I needed to remember what quiet felt like. She looked at him. In this context, away from the offices and the security personnel and the constant operational weight of what he ran, there was a version of Tae-Hyun visible that she had glimpsed in fragments over months, but never seen fully extended. He was less managed, less armored, not different the same person, just with less of the distance engaged. You've never brought anyone here, she said. No. Why me? He considered it. She appreciated that he considered it, rather than reaching for the easy answer. Because you're the one person I've met in 20 years of running this life who I actually want to be honest with, he said. And I've been honest in the operational sense. In the professional sense. But not, he stopped. Started again. Not the other kind. She looked at the view. The mountains in the early morning had a particular color she didn't have a name for. Say the other kind, she said quietly. He was quiet for a long moment. I've wanted you for a long time, he said, before the night 4 months ago became what it became. Before any of this. I noticed you 3 years ago, and I kept the distance because it was the right thing to do, and because I didn't trust myself to manage the complication correctly. He paused. I still don't entirely trust myself to manage it correctly. But I'm less willing to manage it from a distance. She held her coffee cup with both hands and let his words settle into the morning air. I know, she said. He looked at her. I've known for a while, she said. I kept the distance too, for the same reasons. She looked at him directly. I'm not keeping it anymore. What passed between them in the silence after that was not a scene from a story about powerful men and complications in criminal empires. It was two people standing on a terrace in the early morning, admitting to each other that they had already crossed a line and were done pretending otherwise. He put his hand over hers on the railing. Not a grand gesture. Just his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held it. They stood like that for a while and watched the mountains and did not feel the need to say anything further. The 3 days at the estate did something she hadn't expected. It gave her a picture of what the life could look like, not the organizational life, not the crisis management, not the complex negotiation of two strong-willed people, finding terms they could both live with, but the actual daily texture of being with this man. The way he made coffee at 6 in the morning, with a focus that was slightly excessive for the task. The way he read intensely with complete concentration, fully absorbed. The way he laughed, which happened more than she had expected, and was quieter than she would have predicted, and was something she discovered she was interested in generating. She liked him. She had respected him for 3 years and been complicated by him for 6 months, and now in this quieter space, she found that underneath all of it, she genuinely liked the man. That was the part that was the most disorienting. Because liking him made it real in a way that attraction and respect and even the pregnancy had not quite made it. And real meant that the stakes of whatever this was had shifted to a register she couldn't manage from a professional distance. On the last evening, she said, I want to move my things into your penthouse. He looked up from his book. Not all of them, she said. I'm keeping the apartment as a workspace, my own space. But I don't want to be on separate floors anymore. He set the book down. You're sure? I'm not asking your permission, she said. I'm telling you what I want. I thought you should know before I do it. He looked at her with the expression she had started to think of as the one he reserved specifically for her, not quite soft, not quite hard. Something that was neither of those things, because it didn't have enough distance in it to be either. Yes, he said. Come home. The 3 days ended. They came back to the cities, and within 72 hours of returning, the thing Amara had spent 6 months bracing for arrived in a form she had not specifically predicted. She was in a meeting with 2 of the regional coordinators when her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. She excused herself and stepped into the corridor. Marcus. 4 missed calls in 6 minutes. She called back immediately. Where are you? Marcus said. His voice had the specific flatness that meant something was wrong. 26th floor, what happened? I need you in the secure conference room in 5 minutes. A pause. Don't stop anywhere on the way. Don't speak to anyone. She was already walking toward the elevator. Marcus. Tell me. Jin-Soo made a move before we could contain him, Marcus said. He has a contact at a federal field office. He's been building a cooperation case. He went in 2 days ago. She stopped walking. He's cooperating with federal investigators, Marcus said. Against Tae-Hyun. Against the organization. He paused. Against you. She stood in the corridor on the 26th floor of the Kang Group building and felt the floor shift under her in a way that had nothing to do with the building. Me, she said. The allegation is that your position was created to legitimize financial arrangements that are not what they appear on paper. That your promotion was a structural mechanism to move money through operational accounts in a way that shields it from. I know what the allegation means, she said. Her voice came out completely level. She was distantly proud of how level it was. The investigation has been in progress for 60 days, Marcus said. Jin-Soo started feeding them documentation before the demotion, before the warehouse. The whole time he was making internal moves, he was simultaneously building the federal case. 60 days. While she had been negotiating security arrangements and documenting his internal movements and attending board meetings and eating dinner across from Tae-Hyun at a kitchen table, and thinking she understood the shape of the threat for 60 days, Jin-Soo Park had been doing something far more permanent than anything she had tracked. She pressed her back against the corridor wall. Where is Tae-Hyun? She asked. Already in the conference room, he knows. A pause. He's waiting for you. She closed her eyes for one breath. Then she opened them and she pushed off the wall and she walked toward the elevator with the steady, direct pace of a woman who had not yet decided how to feel about the fact that everything she had built in the last 6 months was currently being dismantled by a man she had correctly identified as a threat and had failed to identify as this particular kind. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. 45 seconds. She pressed her palm flat against the wall. This time she didn't count. The conference room on the 32nd floor had no windows. Amara had been in it twice before, both times, for situations that required the kind of conversation that couldn't afford the risk of line of sight from adjacent buildings. Both times she had noticed the absence of windows the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue, that specific wrongness of expected space. Both times she had filed it away and moved on. This time the absence felt different. This time the walls were just walls and the room was just a room, and the air inside it had the recycled flatness of a place that didn't breathe. Tae-Hyun was at the head of the table. He looked up when she walked in. His face told her nothing, and everything simultaneously, the controlled surface was fully engaged, which meant whatever was underneath it was significant enough that he'd made a decision to contain it before she arrived. The organization's lead legal counsel, a sharp-edged woman named Christine Yu, who Amara had worked with on 3 previous matters, and trusted precisely because Christine operated without sentiment in any direction, was seated to Tae-Hyun's left with an open laptop and 2 printed documents. Marcus was at the far end. 2 other people she recognized as outside counsel expensive. Federal-facing were positioned along the right side of the table. Nobody was talking when she walked in. She sat down across from Christine and put her phone face down on the table. "Tell me everything," she said. Christine told her everything. It took 22 minutes. Amara did not interrupt once. The architecture of what Jinsu had built was, she had to admit, with the cold portion of her mind, that was capable of professional assessment, even when the personal portion was engaged in something closer to controlled fury, impressively constructed. He had spent 8 months, not 60 days. 8 months, the timeline they'd identified for his contact with Do-jin, was only part of it systematically documenting financial transactions that moved through Amara's operational accounts in ways that, read with the right framework, could be interpreted as mechanisms for concealing the origins of money that had no clean paper trail. The transactions were real. The accounts were real. The movements of money were real. What Jinsu had done, what made this something other than simple fabrication, what made it genuinely dangerous, was construct a narrative around real events that reframed their purpose entirely. Amara's promotion to Director of Strategic Operations, the formalization of her authority over specific operational accounts, the signed document that Tae-Hyun had reviewed and amended and executed 6 weeks ago, all of it had been anticipated by Jinsu. He had known the formalization was coming because he still had contacts inside the organization, feeding him information even after his demotion. He had built his federal cooperation around the expectation of that document existing. The document that was supposed to protect her professional independence had been constructed into the architecture of a money laundering allegation. She sat with that for a moment. "What's the exposure?" she asked. Christine looked at her directly. "For the organization, significant. For Tae-Hyun personally, we're managing. For you, a pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Your name is on accounts. Your signature is on authorization documents. Without rebuttal evidence that clearly establishes the legitimate operational purpose of those transactions, you are personally exposed at a federal level." The room was very quiet, meaning what specifically Amara said. Meaning you could be looking at aiding and abetting's charges. Financial conspiracy. The federal prosecutor assigned to this is not someone who makes threats he can't execute. Christine turned her laptop to face Amara. "These are the documents Jinsu submitted. I need you to go through them and tell me which transactions you can document independent purpose for and which ones are going to require a different approach." Amara looked at the laptop screen. She looked at the first document, then the second. She turned the laptop back to face Christine. "Give me the full file," she said. "I'll go through it tonight." I'll go through it tonight," Amara repeated. "And I'll have a documented rebuttal for every transaction I authorized." Because I authorized every single one of them for legitimate operational reasons that I can demonstrate with internal records that Jin-Soo does not have access to. She looked at Christine steadily. He has the transactions. He doesn't have the operational context. That's where we build. Christine held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and turned the laptop back. Tae-Hyun had not spoken since Amara walked in. She could feel him, at the other end of the table, feel the controlled weight of what he was holding. The way the air in the room had a different quality in his direction. She looked at him. You knew this was coming, she said. Not accusatory. Just naming it. I knew something was coming, he said. Not the shape of it. A pause. I didn't know he'd used your position as the primary mechanism. Because it's elegant, she said. The word tasted bad in her mouth. He used the thing I did to protect my professional standing, to make me the most legally exposed person in the room. It's elegant. Tae-Hyun's jaw tightened slightly. It's not going to hold. No, she agreed, it's not. But it's going to take time to dismantle, and in the meantime, Christine said, the federal investigation is active, and you are a named person of interest. She looked at Amara carefully. There's also, and I want you to hear this as information, not as pressure, a question of your continued operational role during the investigation. Amara looked at her. Standard protocol in federal investigations of this nature, Christine said, is that named persons of interest are typically advised to step back from operational authority while the matter is pending. To avoid any appearance of ongoing. You're telling me to resign, Amara said. I'm telling you that your legal counsel, which I am currently serving as, would typically advise that course of action. The room was completely silent. Amara put both hands flat on the table. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at Christine. I'm not resigning, she said. Amara, I have 8 months left on the operational restructuring I was brought in to finalize. I have accounts and projects and personnel relationships that will not survive a clean handoff in the middle of a federal investigation without creating exactly the kind of disarray that makes this organization look like. It has something to hide. She kept her voice level, steady. The fury underneath it was enormous, and she was keeping it there underneath, pressurized, controlled. Resigning is what Jin-Soo wants. It confirms his narrative. It removes the person best positioned to demonstrate the legitimate purpose of every transaction he's flagged. She looked at Christine. I'm not resigning. I'm fighting this, and I need you to be a lawyer good enough to help me do that. Christine looked at her for a long moment. Then she closed one folder and opened another. All right, she said. Then let's talk about how we fight. Tae-Hyun caught her in the corridor outside the conference room when the meeting broke at nearly midnight. She heard him behind her and stopped, which she appreciated in herself 3 months ago. She would have kept walking and made him chase the conversation. Growth was not always comfortable to recognize. Hey, he said. She turned. He was standing 2 feet away, and the controlled surface that had been fully engaged for the last 3 hours had come down a few degrees. Not all the way, but enough. I should have anticipated this, he said. I should have understood that when I demoted Jin-Soo, the retaliations. Stop, she said. He stopped. Don't do that, she said. Don't stand in this corridor at midnight and retrospectively architect a version of events where you should have foreseen everything. You didn't. I didn't. We both missed it. That's done. She held his gaze. What we do with it going forward is the only conversation worth having. He looked at her. Something moved through his expression that she had learned to read as the specific thing that happened when she said something that hit a real place in him. Are you scared? He asked. The question surprised her. Not because it was the wrong question, it was exactly the right question. But because he was the one asking it. Yes, she said. Not about the case. I know the case. I know what I authorized and why, and I can document every decision I made. I'm scared about. She stopped. Say it, he said. Quietly, the way she'd said it to him on the terrace. I'm scared that this is the thing that finally makes this too complicated, she said. That this is the point where you look at the situation and decide that the cost of me being here is more than the benefit. The silence after that lasted about 4 seconds. That's not a thing that's going to happen, he said. You can't listen to me, he said it quietly, not loudly, not with force, just with the specific weight of a man who meant something and needed her to understand he meant it. I have spent the last 6 months watching you navigate a situation that most people would have run from, and I have watched you negotiate it with more integrity and more intelligence than anyone I have worked with in 20 years. You found Ri? You found Jinsu's movements. You built the rebuttal framework in the conference room tonight in real time without notes. He paused. You are not a liability to me. You are the most capable person in that organization. And I am not letting Jinsu's construction of events determine what you are. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in this corridor. She had a rule. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They stood there for a moment. Go sleep, he said. We have a long day tomorrow. So do you, I know. He held her gaze. I'll be there. She turned and walked toward the elevator. She pressed the button. She was aware of him standing in the corridor watching her until the doors closed. The next 2 weeks were the hardest she had experienced since the bathroom floor. She spent 12 to 14 hours a day in the legal process going through transaction records, building documentation, working with Christine and the outside counsel to construct the evidentiary architecture that would demonstrate the legitimate operational basis of every account move Jinsu had flagged. She did this with her body at 7 months of pregnancy, with a lower back that had stopped being polite about the hours she was keeping, with a fatigue that sat behind her eyes like something with weight. She did not slow down, because slowing down was what Jinsu had designed this to make her do. Because every day she remained operational and functional and present, she was generating the kind of evidence that his narrative could not survive contact with. Tae-Hyun was navigating his own version of it simultaneously. His exposure was significant. Christine had not minimized that. The federal investigation had tentacles into parts of the organization that predated Amara's involvement by years. And Jinsu's cooperation had included documentation of things that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with the structural reality of what Kang Group actually was, beneath its legitimate surface. She was aware of this. She had always been aware of it, had known, from the day she accepted the position, the full shape of what she was working inside. She had made peace with that knowledge 3 years ago, in the way that intelligent people make peace with complicated moral landscapes, by keeping her own conduct clean and by not pretending the landscape was other than what it was. She was keeping her own conduct clean now. That was the foundation she was building from. What she had not fully reckoned with what arrived on a Wednesday morning in Christine's office in the form of a document she had not expected was the specific transaction that Jinsu had constructed his most significant allegation around. It was an account that Amara had authorized transfers from 6 months ago. She had authorized the transfers. She had the operational documentation. She could explain every dollar. What she had not known at the time of authorization, what had not been disclosed to her, because the person responsible for disclosing it had made a unilateral decision that she didn't need to know was where the underlying funds had originated before they moved through her account. She sat in Christine's office and read the document twice. Then she looked up. Who knew? She asked. Christine's expression told her before the words came. The originating account is structured through a holding entity that predates your position by 4 years, Christine said. The disclosure to you at the time of authorizations was incomplete, Amara said. Was incomplete, Christine confirmed. Who made the decision not to disclose the origin? A pause. The kind of pause that meant Christine had already identified the answer and was managing how to deliver it. Based on the internal documentation, Christine said, the decision to route those funds through an account under your operational authority, without full disclosure of origin, was made by, and she said the name. Amara put both hands flat on Christine's desk. It was not Jinsu's name, it was Tae-Hyun's. She did not go to him immediately. She went back to her office. She sat at her desk. She looked at the wall in front of her for approximately 6 minutes, which was how long it took for the initial impact to metabolize into something she could work with. He had routed funds through her account. He had done it 6 months ago, when she was new to the expanded role, when she was still establishing what her operational authority actually covered. He had done it in a way that was, from a purely technical standpoint, within the scope of his authority as CEO. He had done it without telling her the full origin of what she was authorizing. She thought about what she'd said to him in the early weeks. About the difference between protection and control. About the distinction between being a possession and being the mother of his child. About how he understood that distinction being the thing that would determine how it went between them. He had made a decision about what she needed to know. He had decided for her. He had done exactly what she had told him she would not tolerate, and he had done it 6 months ago, and he had said nothing. She picked up her phone and called him. "I need you in my office," she said. He was there in 4 minutes. He came through the door and it took one look at her face and stopped. He knew. She could see it, the immediate recognition on his face. He had known this was in the documentation. He had known it would surface. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "Tell me why," she said. Her voice was completely level. She was proud of how completely level it was, given that underneath it there was something enormous and precise and barely managed. "The funds needed to move quickly," he said. "The account under your authority was the cleanest available channel. The timeline didn't allow for—" "Stop," she said. He stopped. "That's the operational answer," she said. "I don't want the operational answer. I want to know why you decided that I didn't need to know the full picture of what I was signing my name to." He was quiet for a moment. "Because I didn't want to implicate you in something you hadn't consented to," he said. "The less you knew about the origin, the less exposure you carried if it ever became an issue." "You were protecting me," she said. "Yes. By making a decision about what I needed to know." "Yes," a pause. "I know how that sounds. Do you?" She looked at him across her desk. Not across a conference table, not across the professional distance of his office, across her desk, in her space, where she had spent the last 6 months building something that was genuinely hers. "You sat in this office, and you told me you understood the distinction. You told me you were trying to understand what together actually meant. You've been—" She stopped. She took a breath. "You've been asking me instead of telling me. You've been giving me choices. I have been watching you do that for months, and I have been—" She stopped again. He waited. "I believed you," she said. "I believed the asking was real. And it was real for everything, except the thing you were afraid I'd say no to." The silence was different from any silence she'd sat inside with him. It had a specific quality, the quality of something that had been true for a while and was now visible. "Yes," he said. Not an excuse, not a justification. Just the admission. She looked at him for a long moment. "I need you to leave my office right now," she said. "And I need you to give me time to figure out what I do with this. Because I have a federal investigation that I am building a rebuttal case for, and I cannot do that clearly and manage what I'm feeling about this at the same time." He stood up. He moved toward the door. "Amara." "Not now," she said. He stopped. He held the doorframe for a moment. Then he left. She sat alone in her office, and she pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum where something was pulling at her. And she breathed through it with the methodical focus of a woman who had learned very early that feeling things fully and functioning at the second time were not mutually exclusive, but required conscious management. She was furious. She was also, and this was the part she was least equipped to handle, right now, she was also not surprised. Not entirely. And not being surprised was its own kind of information about how well she actually knew him. And knowing someone well enough to not be surprised by their failure was a different kind of intimacy from anything she had planned for. She picked up the phone and called Christine. "I need the full documentation of the originating account," she said. "Everything. And I need you to tell me whether full disclosure by Tae-Hyun to the federal investigation regarding that account is something that changes my exposure." Christine was quiet for a moment. "If he comes forward with full disclosure and the investigation can verify the origin independently through his cooperation." A pause. "Yes, it substantially changes your exposure. It potentially removes it." "Then that's what needs to happen," Amara said. "You want me to advise him too?" "I want you to present him with the legal reality," Amara said. "What he does with it is his decision." She paused. "I'm not making it for him." She sat in the office. Outside her window, Los Angeles ran its afternoon at full volume. 17 million lives moving through their own complicated architectures, their own negotiations between what they wanted and what was right and what was survivable. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tae-Hyun. "I'll do whatever needs to be done. For the record, I know this doesn't fix it. I'm not trying to fix it yet. I'm just telling you." She read it twice. She put the phone face down. She thought about the man she had watched make 100 decisions in 3 years, and the man she had watched make a completely different kind of decision, on a terrace, at 6 in the morning, and the man who had just sat in her office and admitted his failure without dressing it up or defending it. She thought about what she had told her sister on the phone 6 months ago. I don't entirely understand it. You never do. That's kind of the whole point. She picked up her phone and sent back 2 words. I know. Then she opened her laptop and went back to building the case, because the case was still there, and it still needed to be built, and she was still the person best positioned to build it. The federal interview was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Christine had prepared her for it with the thoroughness of someone who understood that preparation was the only variable still in their control. They had gone through every document, every transaction, every authorization Amara had signed her name to, and built a complete and documented account of the operational purpose behind each one. Tae-Hyun had, without being asked twice, provided full disclosure to federal investigators regarding the originating account. His own legal exposure had expanded as a result. He had done it anyway. Christine had informed Amara of this in the neutral language of legal briefing, and Amara had received it in the neutral language of professional acknowledgement, and neither of them had addressed what it actually meant. The night before the interview, she was in the apartment going through her notes for the 4th time when her phone rang. Her sister. She picked up. "How are you actually doing?" her sister said. Not "how are you." Her sister had never asked "how are you" in her entire life, because her sister understood that "how are you" was a greeting, not a question. "I'm managing," Amara said. "That's not what I asked." She put the notes down. She leaned back on the couch. She put her hand on her stomach, where the baby her son was doing, the thing he did in the evenings, the specific rhythmic movement she had started to find oddly reassuring. "I'm scared," she said, "and I'm angry, and I'm—" She stopped. "In love," her sister said, a pause. "Yeah," Amara said. "That too. Are you going to tell him that?" "Not tonight." But eventually, she looked at the ceiling. Eventually. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then Amara Denise. "You are the most stubborn, most capable, most infuriating person I have ever known. And if you go into that interview tomorrow and you fight for yourself the way I know, everything else is going to be all right." "You don't know that." "No," her sister said. "But I know you." She hung up 20 minutes later and went to sleep. At 4 a.m., the contractions started. She lay very still for a moment, because her mind needed 1 full second to process the fact that what she was feeling was not stress and was not the usual physical discomforts of late pregnancy. Her son was 3 weeks early. She sat up. She breathed through the contraction. She reached for her phone. She called Marcus first, because Marcus was the logistical call, the call that would move the pieces into position. He answered on the first ring. "I need the car," she said. "And someone needs to call Dr. Park. I'm in labor." A pause of approximately 1 second. 10 minutes, Marcus said. She hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed. She breathed. Then she scrolled to Tae-Hyun's name. She looked at it for a moment. She pressed call. He picked up in 3 rings, which meant he had been sleeping, but not deeply. "Amara," his voice was immediate and alert. "I'm in labor," she said. 3 weeks early. Marcus is getting the car. "I'm fine it's early, but it's real." She paused. "I thought you should know." A silence. "I'm coming," he said. "You don't have to. I'm coming," he said again. And this time it was not an offer, it was a statement, and she did not argue with it because she was having a contraction and because she did not want to argue with it. "Okay," she said. She put the phone down and breathed through the contraction, with both hands pressed flat against her stomach. And she thought about all the things she had been planning, and all the things that had gone sideways, and all the things she had not planned for at all, that had turned out to be the most real. The car was waiting in 9 minutes. She was in it in 10. And Tae-Hyun was already in the hospital lobby when she arrived. Still in the clothes he'd clearly pulled on in under 5 minutes, his hair not fully arranged, his face carrying the specific expression of a man who had driven across the city at 4 in the morning and had not once thought about traffic. She walked through the automatic doors, and he was there. She looked at him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. And whatever was unresolved between them, the fury, the disclosure, the conversation they still needed to have it, was there, it was real, it was not gone. But it was also, in this specific moment, secondary to the fact that they were here, and what was coming required both of them to be present for it completely. He fell into step beside her, as the nurse came to meet them, and his hand found hers in the way that had become natural somewhere in the last 3 months, without either of them making a formal decision about it, and she held it. She was not going to think about tomorrow's interview. She was not going to think about the investigation or the documents, or the conversation she still owed him, and the one he still owed her. She was going to think about the next few hours, and the son who had decided to arrive 3 weeks ahead of schedule, and the fact that the most frightening and most real thing currently happening had nothing to do with federal investigators or Jinsu Park, or the architecture of a criminal empire under legal siege. The most frightening and most real thing was that in a few hours she was going to be a mother. And the man beside her, whose hand she was holding in the fluorescent corridor of a private hospital at 4 a.m, was going to be a father. Everything else could wait. Elias Tae-Hyun Bennett Kang was born at 6:17 in the morning. He arrived the way he would apparently do most things in his life, ahead of schedule, and on his own terms, 3 weeks early and entirely unconcerned with the inconvenience this caused everyone around him. He weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces. He had a full head of dark hair and his mother's mouth in a grip, the nurse said while laughing softly. That was something else entirely. Amara held him first. She had not cried during labor, which had lasted 9 hours, and which she had navigated with the same methodical focus she brought to everything that required her to be larger than her own fear. She had breathed through it. She had responded to instructions. She had at several said things to the medical staff that were direct to the edge of rude, and which she would apologize for later, with sincerity and without embarrassment. She had not cried. She cried when they put him in her arms. Not the dramatic kind of crying. The quiet kind, the kind that happens when something so much larger than language arrives, and the body finds the only exit available to it. She pressed her lips against the top of his head, against that dark hair, and she cried without sound while he made the small, furious sounds of a person who had just arrived somewhere bewildering, and was not entirely pleased about it. "Hi," she said. Her voice came out rough. "Hi, I'm your mother." He turned his face toward the sound of her voice. She felt something rearrange itself inside her chest that she understood, even in that moment, was permanent. Tae-Hyun had been in the room for the full 9 hours. She had not asked him to stay. She had not told him to leave. He had positioned himself at the left side of the room, not in the way, not hovering, but present, and he had stayed there through the contractions and the monitoring, and the 4 o'clock hour that blurred into 5 and then 6, and he had not once made the mistake of saying something that needed to be said quietly. When the nurse carried Elias to the scale, and then the warmer and then back, Tae-Hyun watched his son move across the room with an expression Amara had never seen on his face before. It was not the controlled surface. It was not the exhaustion she had become familiar with, or the specific quality of his focus when he was working through a problem. It was something she didn't have a word for, something that looked like a man standing at the edge of something he had not understood was this large until the moment he was standing in front of it. When Amara had held Elias for several minutes, the nurse looked at Tae-Hyun. "Would you like to hold him?" He crossed the room. He sat in the chair beside the bed. The nurse placed Elias carefully into his arms, adjusting his hold with the patient efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. And Kang Tae-Hyun, who had run a criminal empire for 20 years, who had negotiated from positions of absolute power and walked into warehouse traps and navigated federal investigations, without visible fracture, held his newborn son and broke down. Not loudly, not with drama, quietly. The way men who have spent their lives containing things cry, when the container finally cannot hold, the tears moving down his face, while he sat very still and looked at the small person in his arms like he was trying to memorize every detail before the moment escaped him. Amara watched him. She felt the fury still there, the specific fury about the account, about the decision he had made without her, about the thing he had done that she had told him she would not tolerate. It was still there. It was not gone, and she was not pretending it was gone. But she also felt something else watching him hold their son. Something that had been building for months in the patient, unglamorous way that real things build not in dramatic moments, not in declarations, but in the accumulation of 10,000 small observations about who a person actually was when the constructed image was stripped away. She loved him. She had known it before tonight. She had told her sister she knew it. But there was a difference between knowing something and feeling it arrive in your body as fact, and watching Tae-Hyun hold Elias in the early morning light of a hospital room. The man completely undone by something he could not control was the moment it arrived. She didn't say it yet. The moment needed to breathe. The federal interview was rescheduled. Christine had handled it with one phone call and zero explanation, because the birth of a child is one of the circumstances that even federal investigators recognize as non-negotiable. It was rescheduled to the following Tuesday. Amara spent 4 days in the hospital and then came home to the penthouse, because the penthouse was where Tae-Hyun was, and the penthouse was where she had moved her things, and the penthouse was, she had finally stopped pretending otherwise, home. Her apartment on the 14th floor remained. She had kept that promise to herself, but home was here. She spent those 4 days learning her son. That was the only way she could describe it. Learning him the specific register of his different cries, the way he settled against her left shoulder more easily than her right, the feeding schedule that was supposed to follow a pattern and instead followed its own entirely sovereign logic. She was exhausted in a way that existed below the level of ordinary tiredness, a bone-level fatigue that she could not simply push through with willpower, because her body was not interested in what her willpower had to say about it. She slept in fragments, she fed Elias, she slept again. She watched the ceiling and thought about Tuesday. Tae-Hyun moved through the penthouse with a carefulness she had not expected from him. He had arranged everything before she came home, a bassinet in the bedroom. Supplies organized with a precision that she recognized as his specific way of expressing things he didn't have language for. He got up for the 3 a.m. feeding without being asked, sitting in the chair by the bassinet while she fed Elias, saying nothing, just being there in the dark. On the 3rd night, she said, "We need to talk about the account." He had been looking at Elias. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Not tonight," she said. "After Tuesday. When the immediate legal situation is resolved and I'm not navigating it on 4 hours of sleep." She held his gaze across the dim room. "But I need you to know that we're having that conversation. That it doesn't go away because Elias is here." "I know," he said. "I'm not expecting it to." "Good." She looked down at their son. "He's very loud for someone this small. He gets that from you." She looked up sharply. He was not quite smiling, but it was close. She looked back at Elias and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tight. Tuesday arrived with the specific indifference of calendars, which did not rearrange themselves for newborns or personal crises, or the complicated emotional architecture of people navigating both simultaneously. Christine met her at the federal building at 8:30. Amara had slept 5 hours, which was more than she'd slept in a single stretch since the birth. She was wearing a suit she had pressed herself the night before because the physical act of pressing a suit was something she found grounding, and she needed grounding badly this morning. She looked the way she always looked when it mattered, composed, direct, entirely present. The interview lasted 4 hours. She answered every question. She produced documentation for every transaction. She walked 2 federal investigators through the operational logic of every authorization she had signed, with the specificity and clarity of someone who had made legitimate decisions and could account for them fully. The transaction routed through her account. Without her knowledge of its full origin, she addressed it directly, without prompting, before the investigators asked. She explained what she had known, what she had not been told, and what the subsequent disclosure by Kang Tae-Hyun to the investigation had established about the origin and movement of those funds. She stated clearly that had she known the full origin at the time of authorization, she would have declined to sign. One of the investigators, a woman in her 40s with the careful eyes of someone who had been doing this long enough to have a reliable baseline for the difference between truth and performance, looked at her for a long moment after that statement. "You're aware?" The investigator said that the CEO's disclosure substantially implicates his own organization. "Yes," Samara said, "and that the disclosure was made after you identified the transaction as an issue." "The disclosure was his decision," Amara said. "I identified the transaction and presented him with the legal reality. What he chose to do with it was his choice. You didn't ask him to cooperate." "No. Why not?" She looked at the investigator directly. "Because I don't make decisions for him," she said. "That's a principle I've held to throughout this situation." He extended me the same. The investigator wrote something down. The interview ended at 12:47 p.m. Christine met her in the corridor outside. "You were clean," Christine said. "Every transaction clean." A pause. "The originating account issue with his disclosure and your testimony, I think they're satisfied on your personal exposure." Amara nodded. "Tae-Hyun's situation is different. Christine said carefully. I know, Amara said. The organization's exposure is significant. I know, Amara said again. Tell me the real picture. Not the managed version. Christine looked at her. Then she told her the real picture. It took 12 minutes. By the end of it, they were sitting on a bench in the corridor because Amara's body had quietly communicated that standing for another 12 minutes was not something it was prepared to negotiate. The real picture was this. The federal investigation had been building for longer than Jinsu's involvement. There were elements of Kang Group's operational structure that had been under scrutiny before Jinsu walked into a federal building with a folder. His cooperation had accelerated a process already in motion. Tae-Hyun's own disclosure had added to it, but had also, and this was the part Christine said carefully created the conditions for a negotiated resolution rather than a full prosecution. Negotiated resolution meant significant restructuring. It meant financial penalties of a scale that would reshape the organization. It meant Tae-Hyun's direct operational authority over certain aspects of the business being placed under federal oversight for a defined period. It meant the parts of Kang Group that had operated in the gray space between legitimate and otherwise were going to be dismantled, not by force but by agreement. It was not prison. It was not the end. But it was the end of what had existed before. Amara sat with that. He knows all of this? She asked. He's known for 2 weeks, Christine said. Since he made the disclosure. He went in understanding what it would cost. She thought about that. She thought about a man who had spent 20 years building something, and who had then, when the moment arrived, chosen to dismantle it himself, rather than allow it to be used as a weapon against the people around him. She thought about cost. About what it meant to pay a price you'd chosen, rather than one that had been extracted from you. Okay, she said. She stood up. Okay. She came home to find Tae-Hyun in the living room, with Elias on his chest, the baby in that particular configuration that seemed to settle him, flat against the warmth of his father's chest, the specific rhythm of a heartbeat doing the work that nothing else could. Tae-Hyun had one hand flat against Elias's back. He was not watching anything. He was just sitting in the quiet of the apartment, holding his son. He looked up when she came in. She sat down beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. How did it go? He said. Quietly, because Elias was at the edge of sleep. Clean, she said. My exposure is resolved, he exhaled. It was small and controlled, but she felt it. Yours isn't, she said. No. Christine told me the full picture. He was quiet for a moment. I should have told you myself. Yes, she said, you should have. Silence. I've been taking things apart, he said. The parts that needed to come apart. Some of it I'd been meaning to do for years. The legitimate operations are real. They're viable. They don't need the other structure to survive. I'd told myself I was managing the transition, and I was actually just not moving. He paused. Jinsu forced the timeline. That's the only honest way to say it. How much of what existed before survives this? She asked. The legal businesses, the real estate portfolio, the restaurants, the equity fund. The things I built that were actually built. He looked at Elias. Those survive. The rest stopped. The rest was always going to have to end. I just didn't want to be the person who ended it. She looked at the side of his face. He hadn't shaved this morning. He looked tired in the deep way, the kind that wasn't about sleep. You're the person who ended it, she said. Yes. That matters, she said. He looked at her. It matters that you chose it, she said. It matters that you did it when it cost something. That's the difference between a man who changes and a man who just gets changed by circumstances. She held his gaze. I needed you to know I see that. Something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically. The small shift, the one she had been reading for months. The one that meant she had reached the real place. I need to say something to you, he said. Okay. What I did with the account, he stopped. Started again. I told myself I was protecting you. That was real. But it was also easier than the alternative, which was telling you the full truth and trusting you to handle it and accepting that you might decide. The full truth was something you didn't want to be part of. He paused. I was afraid you'd leave, and instead of sitting with that fear and making an honest decision about it, I managed the information. He looked at her directly. That's the real reason. Not strategy fear. She sat with that. I know, she said. I knew that was the real reason. You knew I know you, she said simply. He was quiet. You don't get to do that again, she said. The deciding for me about what I need to know. Once. That's what it was. Once, he said. I understand. I mean it. I know you mean it. She looked at Elias, who had fully surrendered to sleep on his father's chest, small and unaware and entirely confident in the safety of where he was. She thought about what it took to be that confident, about the conditions required to build that kind of certainty in a person from the very beginning. I love you, she said. She said it to the room mostly, to the quiet apartment and the sleeping baby and the man beside her. She said it without looking at him, because looking at him would have made it into something performed, and she didn't want it performed. She heard him breathe. I've loved you, he said, for a long time. I know that too, she said. The conversation she'd promised they would have, the real one, the full one. The accounting of everything happened 3 weeks later, when Elias was sleeping reliably in 4-hour stretches, and Amara had enough consecutive sleep in her body to trust herself to say what needed to be said without the filter of pure exhaustion. They sat at the kitchen table, not in his office, not in a conference room. The kitchen table, where they ate dinner, and where she sometimes worked in the early morning, and where the residue of daily life accumulated in the form of coffee cups and mail, and a small plant she'd bought on impulse from a street market that was thriving despite her historically poor track record with plants. She said what she needed to say. All of it not just about the account, but about the full accumulation of the months behind them. About the ways he had understood and the ways he had failed to understand. About the difference between the man she'd agreed to terms with in the beginning and the man she actually knew now. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not defend. He did not move to resolution before she was finished. He sat at the kitchen table and he let her say all of it. Then he said his version. The failures he owned, named specifically, without the buffer of justification. The things he had gotten wrong about her, about what she needed, about what it meant to be with someone who was not going to bend to his gravity without choosing to. The way he had confused care with control so many times that he had genuinely stopped being able to tell the difference, and the slow work of learning the distinction in real time. They talked for 3 hours. At the end of it, nothing was dissolved or erased. The things that had happened. The cost of them was the cost of them. But the accounting was complete, every transaction between them, named, examined, and placed where it actually belonged. That was the foundation. Not a clean slate, real one marked and worn and honest. 3 years moved the way time moves when it's full. The legal process resolved over 18 months. The Kang Group restructuring was significant and public and difficult and real. Tae-Hyun navigated it without theater, without the kind of self-pity that would have been understandable and that she had privately been prepared to deal with. He did the work, the genuinely hard work of dismantling something he'd spent his life building and constructing something legitimate in its place, with the same focused discipline he'd brought to everything. The legitimate operations thrived. The real estate portfolio expanded. The private equity fund pivoted toward something that looked remarkably like what Amara had suggested in operational meetings 2 years prior, an approach that she had outlined in documents that still existed and that Tae-Hyun referenced. Specifically when she raised an eyebrow at the pivot. You wrote it 18 months ago, he said. I know I wrote it. It's a good plan. I know it's a good plan, she said. I wrote it. He looked at her with the expression she had stopped trying to name, because she knew what it was. Jin-Soo Park did not resurface in their lives. The federal cooperation agreement he had struck had its own consequences, and he moved through them in a city that was not Los Angeles. Amara did not spend time thinking about Jin-Soo. She had spent enough time inside the architecture of what he'd built, and when it was dismantled, she let it go cleanly. Dujin's case resolved in federal court. He received 11 years. The organization he had built dissolved without him at its center. The way organizations built on a single person's force of will tend to dissolve when that person is removed. Daniel Rhee, the logistics coordinator, the original leak, had cooperated with the investigation as part of his own negotiated resolution. She had no particular feelings about him. He had been afraid and had made a choice that suited his fear. People did that. The apartment on the 14th floor became her office. She kept it, as she had promised herself she would, as the space that was entirely hers, where she worked and thought, and occasionally needed to exist without being adjacent to anyone else's needs or presence. Tae-Hyun did not have a key. That was not hostility, it was structure. The structure that kept the rest of everything else honest. She built her career in the new Kang Group with the same methodical focus she had always brought to her work. And she built it in a way that was hers, not because she was the CEO's partner, not because of proximity to power, but because she was genuinely excellent at what she did, and the results showed it. The organization knew the difference. She made sure they knew the difference. Elias grew. He grew with his father's stubbornness and his mother's mouth, which was an extremely specific combination that made them both feel, privately, like they deserved some kind of recognition for what they were navigating. He spoke early and often and without particular concern for whether the timing was appropriate. He had opinions about his bedtime, his breakfast, the organization of his toys, and the specific route they took on his evening walk. He had, at 2 years old, attempted to negotiate his vegetable situation in a way that was frankly impressive, even as it was unsuccessful. Tae-Hyun read him bedtime stories with the complete investment he brought to everything, not performing, not going through motions, genuinely present in the story, doing different voices, remembering from one night to the next exactly what had happened in the narrative, and being gently corrected by Elias when he misremembered. Amara watched this from the doorway sometimes. Just watched. The man who had once told her that his greatest fear was losing her, that he had only understood it when he was standing in a warehouse about to find out if he was going to walk out, was now a man who sat on the edge of a small bed and made voices. For fictional characters, because his son expected it, and he had decided that expectation was worth meeting. People changed. Incompletely, imperfectly, never exactly in the shape you hoped, but they changed. That was the thing she had come to believe with the conviction of someone who had watched it happen, up close, slowly over the full accumulated weight of years. Elias's 3rd birthday happened on a Saturday in October. They had it in the yard of the estate outside the city, the property in the San Bernardino range, the place where she had first understood that she was not keeping her distance anymore. It looked different in October than it had in the spring of that first visit. The trees had changed. The light was lower and more gold. There were children from Elias's playgroup and their parents, and Amara's sister, who had driven from Houston specifically, and who arrived with the specific energy of a woman who was not going to pretend this moment was ordinary. There were people from the organization who had become, without formal announcement, part of the extended fabric of their lives. There was cake and streamers, and a dog that belonged to one of the guests, and that Elias had immediately adopted as his personal project for the afternoon. Amara was 7 months pregnant. This one they had planned. Or as much as they planned anything, the conversation had happened honestly in daylight, with both of them awake and clear-eyed, and making a deliberate choice. She had wanted another child. She had told him so in those exact words, and he had looked at her the way he always looked at her when she said something that reached the real place, and he had said yes. She was standing near the table with the food, watching Elias pursue the dog across the yard with the absolute physical commitment of a 3-year-old who had identified a goal, when Tae-Hyun came to stand beside her. He was watching Elias too. "Do you think about it?" he said. How it started. She looked at her son in the yard. She thought about a bathroom floor, a pregnancy test, a plan for escape that had dissolved before she could execute it. She thought about an elevator in 45 seconds, and a man she had been very careful about for 3 years, before being very uncareful about him, in a way that had changed everything. "Yes," she said. "Are you angry about it, still?" She considered the question honestly, the way she tried to consider most things. "No," she said. "I was angry for a long time now. It's part of the map." She looked at him. "Are you?" "No," he paused. "I think about it, and he stopped. Grateful is the wrong word for it. It's too small." She understood what he meant. Grateful was the word for manageable things. What had happened to both of them was not manageable. It had remade them in ways they had not consented to, and had not predicted, and had not been able to control. And that was not a thing you were grateful for. It was a thing you reckoned with, over and over, until the reckoning itself became the relationship. He reached into his jacket pocket. He put a ring on the table beside her. She looked at it. It was platinum and simple, no statement, no drama. The kind of ring that said what it meant by being exactly what it was and nothing more. She looked at him. "I'm not doing this the way I do most things," he said. I don't have a structure for this. I don't know how to manage it correctly." He looked at her directly. "I know that you don't need this. I know you have never needed anything from me in the way that would make this a transaction. I know your independence is not something I earned and not something I can take away. He paused. This is not me asking you to be something you're not. It's me asking whether you want to be what you already are, with the whole thing named. She looked at the ring. She thought about the woman who had stood in that elevator 3 years ago, pressing her palm against the wall, counting the seconds like they were the only thing she could hold on to. She thought about how far that woman was from here, and also how completely she was still present in the way she held herself, in the way she made her decisions, in the way she had built everything around her with the same hands that had been shaking very slightly on that elevator. She picked up the ring. She looked at it for a moment. Ask me correctly, she said. He looked at her. Then slowly, he knelt on the grass of the yard outside the estate, where she had first understood she was not keeping her distance anymore. Amara Bennett, he said, you are the woman who challenged every part of me, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. Will you marry me? Across the yard, Elias had stopped chasing the dog. He was watching his parents with the focused attention of a child who understood that something was happening, even if he didn't understand exactly what. She put the ring on her own finger. Yes, she said. Tae-Hyun rose from the grass. He put his hand against her face and she leaned into it briefly. And then she turned back toward the yard, because Elias was already running toward them with the absolute zero hesitation speed of a 3-year-old who had decided the moment required his participation. Does yes mean cake? He demanded. Amara laughed. It came out full and real and loud, the kind of laugh that didn't care what it sounded like. Eventually, she said, yes means eventually cake. Elias accepted this with the gravity of someone who recognized a negotiation that had reached its conclusion and turned back toward the dog. 2 months later, Naomi Bennett Kang was born. She arrived on time, which immediately distinguished her from her brother. She was smaller, quieter in those first moments, looking at the world with an expression of careful assessment that made the nurse laugh and say she'd be running the place inside a week. Tae-Hyun held her the same way he had held Elias, with the complete stillness of a man who understood that the thing in his arms was not something he could manage or direct or protect through sheer force of will. The same awe, the same silence. Amara watched him from the bed. She was exhausted, and her body was making various complaints about recent events, and she was watching the man she was going to marry hold their daughter in the early morning light of a hospital room. She thought about the shape of what had brought them here, the strange and uncontrolled and often painful shape of it, the things that had been extracted from both of them on the way. She thought about what she had told her sister in the early months, when she had been trying to explain something she didn't have language for yet. I don't entirely understand it. She understood it better now. Not completely, some things didn't resolve into complete understanding, and she had made her peace with that. But better. She understood that love was not the clean, chosen thing she had always imagined it would be when it finally arrived in her life. It was not orderly. It did not wait for the right conditions. It arrived in the form of 2 lines on a test in a bathroom, and a man's voice saying, "Were you going to tell me?" and a 45-second elevator ride, and a decade of small observations accumulating into something she hadn't planned for and couldn't imagine giving back. She understood that being chosen was different from being kept. That the man across the room had taken a long time to learn the difference, and that she had needed to insist on the difference, and that the insisting had been worth every difficult moment it had cost. She understood that she had not stayed because he had made her stay. She understood that with the complete clarity of someone who had done the honest accounting. She had stayed because somewhere in the full, long, complicated year of all of it, staying had become her choice. Her daughter made a small sound. Tae-Hyun adjusted his hold, murmuring something too low for Amara to hear from across the room. She did not ask him to repeat it. Some things were allowed to be his alone. She put her head back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly and let the quiet of the room be what it was. No secrets left, no rival left standing at the edge of their lives. No unfinished thing between them that hadn't been named and placed where it belonged. Just the morning. Just her daughter's small sounds, and her son at home with her sister, probably negotiating his breakfast with the same energy he brought to everything. Just the man across the room who had once told her she was staying, and who had learned slowly, imperfectly, at considerable cost what it meant to let someone choose. She was not his possession. She had never been. She was the woman who had looked at everything this life contained: the danger, the complication, the man himself, in all his flawed and difficult reality, and had made her choice with open eyes. She closed hers now. She slept.